All right, so today we are going to be doing a deep dive on becoming active allies at work. And I'm really excited about this one. We're going to be using this fantastic Harvard Business Review article. It's called 7 Ways to Practice Active Allyship. It's by Poornima Luthra, and it's really going to be our roadmap today.
I love that article. Luthra's approach is so practical. She lays out this really clear path, and it makes allyship less about these kind of like lofty ideals
Yeah.
and more about taking concrete steps, which I think can be really empowering for people.
Absolutely. And here's a crazy stat that just blew my mind. Companies with strong allyship cultures have employees that are 50% less likely to leave. That's incredible.
Yeah, it's huge. It really highlights the impact of having a truly inclusive environment. Imagine feeling so supported and valued at work that you're 50% less likely to want to leave. It really speaks volumes about the power of allyship in creating that kind of workplace.
For sure. Okay, so before we get into the nitty-gritty, just a little background on Luthra. She's not just a writer, she's an associate professor at Copenhagen Business School and the author of Diversifying Diversity. So clearly she knows what she's talking about.
She definitely brings a wealth of knowledge and experience to the table. And you can tell that she's not just talking theory, she's drawing on these real-world insights, which makes it so valuable.
Exactly. Okay, so let's talk about the problem Luther highlights. I think it's something we've all kind of experienced. Even with all the DEI initiatives out there, progress toward equality feels really slow. The World Economic Forum predicts it'll take 132 years to reach gender parity.
132 years. That's a staggering number. And it really underscores the urgency of addressing this issue. The problem, as Luthra sees it, is rooted in fear. On both sides, actually.
Fear, can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Absolutely. So, on the one hand, you have individuals from majority groups who might fear saying or doing the wrong thing. They might worry about being perceived as insensitive or overstepping boundaries. And then on the other hand, you have individuals from marginalized groups who may fear speaking up about their experiences, worried about, facing backlash or negative consequences.
Yeah, it creates this kind of standstill,
Right.
right? Where there's no genuine dialogue or progress can really be made. So how do we break free from that fear?
Well, that's where allyship comes in. And Luthra defines it beautifully. She says it's about building relationships to advance inclusion. And I love that she emphasizes progress over perfection, which I think takes a lot of pressure off.
Totally, yeah. It makes it feel achievable. It's not about being this perfect advocate overnight, but about constantly learning and striving to do better.
Exactly. And she also emphasizes this really crucial point, that allyship is about amplifying the voices of others, not speaking for them, not trying to fix them, but genuinely lifting them up so their perspectives and experiences can be heard.
I love that. Okay, so now let's get into Luthra's 7 steps to active allyship. She outlines them so clearly and practically, and I think it's helpful to approach them in 2 stages. First, understanding ourselves and others, and then putting that understanding into action.
That's a great way to frame it, because action without understanding can be misguided, and understanding without action is meaningless.
Totally. So let's start with understanding. The first step is deep curiosity, and Luthra encourages us to explore our own diversity thumbprint and to understand those of others. I love that term, diversity thumbprint. It's so cool.
It is. It really captures the idea that we all have this unique combination of identities and experiences that shape our worldview. And recognizing that complexity, both in ourselves and in others, is the foundation of allyship.
It's like acknowledging that everyone's coming to the table with a different set of experiences and perspectives, and even privileges. And to be an ally, we need to be genuinely curious about those differences.
Right. It's about asking questions, listening with an open mind, and seeking to understand perspectives that are different from our own.
Now, step 2 is honest introspection. And this one might feel a little uncomfortable. Luther says, and I quote, "If you have a brain, you are biased. No one is exempt."
That's such a powerful statement, because it removes the guilt and shame that's often associated with bias. It acknowledges that bias is a natural human phenomenon, but it's what we do with that awareness that matters.
Right, so it's not about beating ourselves up for having biases, but about recognizing them so that we can challenge them.
Yeah, exactly. And Luther recommends tools like the Harvard Implicit Association Test. Have you ever taken one of those?
I have, and it was definitely eye-opening. It really helps you pinpoint those unconscious biases that can sometimes sneak into our actions and decisions without us even realizing it.
It's such a valuable tool for self-reflection and for understanding how our unconscious biases might be affecting our interactions with others.
Which leads us to step 3, humble acknowledgement. And this is where we recognize and acknowledge the privileges we may have based on our identities.
Luthra provides a really helpful checklist in the article, a checklist of privileges we might take for granted, like never having to worry about being profiled by law enforcement because of our race, or never having to change our name to fit in.
Right. It's about understanding that not everyone has the same advantages
Hmm.
and acknowledging those disparities so we can use our privilege to advocate for those who don't.
It's not about guilt or shame. It's about responsibility. Recognizing our privilege allows us to use it as a tool to create a more equitable world.
So we've covered the first 3 steps, which are all about laying that crucial groundwork of self-awareness and understanding.
We've explored the role of fear, the importance of curiosity, and the power of acknowledging our own biases and privileges. These are all essential components of becoming an effective ally.
So next we'll dive into the action steps. How do we take this understanding and actually put it to work in our everyday lives? That's what we'll be exploring after the break.
Looking forward to it.
All right, see you in a sec. All right, so we've laid the groundwork, understanding ourselves, acknowledging our biases, recognizing our privilege. But now, how do we actually translate that into action? That's where Luthra's next 4 steps come in. And they're all about putting allyship into practice.
Yeah, it's about moving beyond awareness and into tangible action, which can definitely feel daunting for some people. But Luthra provides such a clear and practical guidance.
Exactly. And the first action step is what she calls empathetic engagement. And this is where we tackle those subtle but pervasive microaggressions. Luthra calls them termite biases, which I think is such a brilliant analogy.
Oh, it's so good, because it really highlights how these seemingly small actions can actually eat away at someone's sense of belonging over time. They might seem insignificant on their own, but they have this cumulative effect that can be incredibly damaging.
That's like death by 1,000 paper cuts, right? So how do we address these termite biases effectively?
Well, Luthra stresses the importance of empathy, not accusation. So instead of jumping to conclusions or getting defensive, we need to approach these situations with curiosity and a genuine desire to understand.
So instead of saying, you're being biased, we could ask questions like, how did you arrive at that decision? Or, I didn't quite get the joke, could you explain it?
Exactly. It's about creating a space for dialogue and self-reflection, rather than shutting down the conversation.
I see. And Luthra calls these authentic conversations, and she emphasizes that they need to be grounded in psychological safety.
Absolutely. Psychological safety means creating an environment where people feel comfortable speaking up, without fear of judgment or negative consequences. Without that, these conversations just can't happen authentically.
Right. It's not just about what we say, but how we say it. It's about creating that space where people feel safe to share their perspectives and experiences, even if they're different from our own.
Exactly. And a big part of that is avoiding gaslighting.
Right.
So when someone shares an experience of bias, it's crucial that we listen without dismissing their feelings or denying their reality.
We've all had those moments where we felt like our experiences were being minimized or invalidated, and it can be so damaging to our sense of trust and self-worth.
Absolutely. So instead of saying things like, you're being too sensitive, or I'm sure they didn't mean it that way, we need to validate their feelings and acknowledge the impact of the behavior.
Yeah.
Even if it wasn't intentional.
Yeah, it's about truly listening, seeking to understand, and acknowledging the harm that's been done.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that leads us to step 6, which Luthra calls vulnerable interactions. And this one's all about embracing our own imperfections and being open to feedback.
This is where Luthra's idea of a bias compass circle comes in, right?
Yes, exactly. So she suggests creating this trusted group of colleagues who can help us identify our blind spots. It's like having a personal board of advisors for allyship, helping us see things from different angles.
I love that. That's such a practical and valuable tool. Because let's be real, we all have blind spots. It's impossible to be aware of every single bias we might hold.
Right, and that's where vulnerability comes in. It's about being willing to admit that we don't have all the answers, and being open to feedback, even if it's uncomfortable.
Having that safe space to be vulnerable, to ask questions, and to learn from our mistakes is so crucial for growth.
It is. It's about recognizing that allyship is a journey, not a destination. We're all going to mess up sometimes. The key is to learn from those experiences and keep striving to do better.
Okay, so finally we come to step 7, which Luthra calls courageous responsibility. And this is where we start taking action to create more inclusive environments, using whatever influence we have to actually make a difference.
Yeah, it's about recognizing that allyship is not passive. It requires us to be active and intentional in our efforts to challenge injustice and advocate for equality.
Luthra gives some great examples of what this looks like in practice, like speaking up when you witness a microaggression, Asking whose perspective are we missing in meetings? Or recommending colleagues from underrepresented groups for opportunities.
Right, it's about taking those everyday actions that can shift the culture in our workplaces and create a more inclusive environment for everyone.
And I think it's important to remember that we don't have to be in a position of power to practice courageous responsibility.
Exactly. We all have spheres of influence, whether it's within our team, our department, or even our social circles. We can all make a difference.
And remember, courageous responsibility doesn't always have to mean these grand gestures. Sometimes it's about those small, consistent actions that over time create a more welcoming and inclusive environment.
It's about speaking up when you see something wrong, amplifying the voices of those who are often unheard, and using your privilege to advocate for those who don't have the same advantages.
And it's about doing all of this with empathy, understanding, and a genuine desire to create a more equitable world. So we've covered a lot of ground exploring Luther's 7 steps to active allyship. And I hope you're feeling empowered to start putting these steps into action in your own life.
Me too, because that's what it's all about, taking this knowledge and turning it into tangible change.
And remember, allyship is a journey, not a destination. We're all constantly learning and growing.
And we don't have to do it alone. We can support each other, learn from each other, and hold each other accountable. We can build this culture of allyship where everyone feels empowered to make a difference.
I love that. Okay, so we're going to wrap things up and leave you with some food for thought right after this. Okay, we're back. And after unpacking all 7 of those steps with Luthra's guidance, I am feeling incredibly energized. Like we've been handed this amazing toolkit for actually creating real change out there.
Oh, absolutely. You know what I find so compelling about Luthra's work is that she doesn't shy away from the complexities of allyship. She acknowledges the discomfort, the potential for missteps, but she also really emphasizes the transformative power of just showing up and taking action.
Yeah, it's about embracing that learning process, right? Knowing that we're not going to get it perfect every time, but that each experience, each conversation is an opportunity for growth.
For sure. And I think one of the most important takeaways from this whole deep dive is that allyship isn't about being a savior or having all the answers. It's about recognizing that we're all part of a larger system.
Yeah.
And we all have a role to play in dismantling those systems of oppression that hold so many people back.
Totally. It's about shifting our mindset from us versus them to we're all in this together. Because ultimately, creating a more equitable and inclusive world benefits everyone.
100%. And I think that sense of collective responsibility is what fuels that courageous responsibility Luthra talks about. It's about recognizing that our individual actions, no matter how small they may seem, can contribute to a larger movement for change.
Yeah, think about it this way. What is everyone listening to this deep dive committed to just one act of courageous responsibility this week? Imagine the ripple effect that would create.
I know, right? It could be something as simple as speaking up when you hear a harmful joke, or using inclusive language in your emails, or amplifying the voices of marginalized colleagues in meetings.
Those actions might seem small, but they send a powerful message. They create a culture where everyone feels seen, heard, and respected.
And that's what it's all about, right? Creating that sense of belonging for everyone. Because when people feel like they belong, they can truly thrive.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into active allyship, we want to leave you with a challenge. What is one action that you can take today to practice courageous responsibility in your own sphere of influence?
Don't overthink it. Just choose one small step and commit to it. And remember, allyship is a journey, not a destination. It's about continuous learning, reflection, and action.
Yeah, it's about showing up even when it's hard. It's about embracing discomfort as an opportunity for growth. And it's about believing that together we can create a world where everyone has the chance to shine.
I love that. Well, thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We hope you found it insightful and inspiring.
And until next time, keep diving deep and keep pushing for a more inclusive world.